Hello, my name is Fiona Byrne. Thank you very much for having me as part of the Craft Hub Conference 2023. I am a maker. I work mostly with glass, and I trained at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, and I worked in Ireland, in the UK, and in Switzerland. Um, my practice tends to start from researching an idea. Um, Generally, I look at forms of knowledge, looking at what's valued, what's being lost, what can't be accessed. And as someone who's studied and worked in the craft of glassblowing, skills being lost is a constant concern. We're losing facilities and ways of learning. And it's my belief that this type of tacit knowledge is very much undervalued by modern educational institutions and within wider society. I'm working on a new body of work which will deal with themes of knowledge transfer, bodily intelligence, and the idea of ecosystems of knowledge. I'm currently in the process of making this new work, and I'm heading into the production phase of the project after some time researching. So that's what I'll be presenting today, is the research part of the project. However, I'm not an expert, and I'm presenting my understanding of this topic as it relates to my practice as a maker. I'm going to show you some pictures as I go through. They're just process images, just to give you a feel of the making process and the types of work that I make. But I want to tackle a few things in this talk. It's only a short amount of time. So I'm going to look at the separation of body and mind, tacit knowledge or embodied knowledge, and how it conflicts with current prevalent value systems, how we could reimagine or relocate intelligence, and how these ideas have shaped my current body of work. So my hope is that you can reposition craft skills in relation to ideas of knowledge and highlight their value within an emerging reimagination of intelligence. So, Mann, the thinking hand, explains how the modern cult of the body in Western philosophy has located the site of rational thought in the mind and left a cleft between bodily experience and thought. Although this view is slowly shifting, mind body dualism, where the body is an unthinking entity, is deep rooted in Western culture and in our psyche. It's not just that these elements have been fractured or separated, but that the mind is placed above the body in terms of a hierarchy of knowledge. In craft, this separation poses questions about where we hold knowledge and how it is valued. And looking outside of this mind body dichotomy, we find other thinkers who have brought the body back into the conversation. Lakoff and Johnson in Philosophy in the Flesh tell us that reason is shaped by the peculiarities of our human body. And in this vein, our systems of intelligence are grounded within our bodily experience rather than separated from them. And there are many schools of thought and philosophies which look at embodied knowledge, tacit knowledge, or intangible knowledge. For example, Immanuel Kant expressed the idea that the hand is the window to the mind, and Merleau-Ponty's phenomenological approach has become increasingly popular, which is centered on lived experiences. I was drawn into these conversations firstly by the words of Polanyi: "We can know more than we can tell." And it's a simple statement, but as a maker, it spoke to me. And Polanyi advocates that to understand human knowledge, we must recognize its sensuous, sensual, emotional context, and how these shape what we know, what we can know, and what we want to know. So, by expanding our focus corporally, the transmission of traditional craft skills is a prime example of knowledge that does not reside solely in the brain, but also in the body. The issue with conceptualizing this type of knowing is, as Peter Dormer explains, that people cannot apprehend practical knowledge intellectually until they've experienced it. Or, as he gives the example, the only way to know what coffee smells like is to smell it. So the making process challenges and provides living examples of embodied knowledge, which cannot be dissected and compartmentalized into simple dualism or easily explained by words. Adamson, in The Invention of Graft, points out the limitations of verbal or written knowledge to communicate the totality of the making process. He says it's not possible to thoroughly replace the actions of a craft with a linguistic equivalent. This means learning by doing is the only way to obtain a full understanding of the process, and to do this, we need knowledge to be passed from person to person through instruction and practice. And this is a slow and often difficult process. And Dormer talks of this slowness of craft and how it's at odds with how we live and how we educate today. But it's not just time that's the issue. There are value systems at play that prioritize explicit knowledge over tacit knowledge. And unfortunately, the majority of formal learning experiences focus on the transfer of explicit skills alone, failing to pass on tacit knowledge. While institutes for education seek to prepare the next generation for this new world of work, the question of how we safeguard traditional skills remains. Melissa Peet explained how education systems based entirely on disembodied knowledge and not connected to the earth, to the ground, to bodies, or to the context ignore a large section of knowledge, and as such, they limit our educational potential and an opportunity for holistic learning experiences. We also face larger prevailing value systems, such as our current model of capitalism with its focus on economic return. And running universities on this basis can result in what Finn McRedmond described as the general dismissal of the arts at the altar of the economically efficient subjects. Glass is particularly economically challenging. We have high running costs and can generally accommodate lower student numbers. And with criteria of economic return, quick results, and individualism, teaching glass doesn't make sense on these terms. So it's really about who sets criteria on which we judge worth and worthiness. In Ways of Being, Brindle explains the idea of umwelt in relation to intelligence and how by setting criteria from a particular worldview and using it to judge something that falls outside of this will inevitably fall short of assessing what it was set out to do. So we must not just challenge conclusions being made about value, but also examine the criteria against which these judgments have been weighed. So who's setting the criteria and for whom? Framing of how we conceive knowledge is required. Erin O'Connor, an ethnographer who researched the learning process in glassmaking, advocated for a shift from cognitive reading to corporal reading. But I like the reimagining that goes a little bit further. One idea for this was put forward by Alva Noe, who conceives of knowledge as an exchange between body, brain, and environment. It's relational. It's the body, but the body in the world. And Lakoff and Johnson put forward an idea that reason is not an essence that separates us from animals, but rather places us on a continuum with them. And similarly, Brindle takes this idea of relationships and expands it to an ecology of intelligence, further seeing intelligence as multiple, extending it not just to beings, but also to things. So within glass blowing, an ecosystem might encompass, amongst other things, the studio environment, the people, materials, tools, and objects made. Valentine and Follett from Dundee University point out that there is a lack of voice from practitioners in reconceptualizations of knowledge, particularly knowledge related to craft. And as a maker, through my work, I'm offering an insight into this topic from my perspective. So, if we consider objects as part of this ecosystem of intelligence, then true conscious making, the craft object, can be conceived as the site of knowledge, a place where information is stored and can be accessed. For me, this is how I think about my practice. The process of learning, the transfer of skills, embodying knowledge, and creating work is all part of the subject matter. Or as Whitehead, quoted in O'Connell, said, how an entity becomes constitutes what the entity is. I hope there is a resonance held within the pieces that is authentic, and that my work offers the viewer an opportunity to access an experience where they are invited to rethink intelligence in a broader context, to question their place within the ecosystem, or, as Mary Oliver put it, to find your place in the family of things. Simon Wells believes that the moment we view a beautiful object, we give up our imaginary position as the centre. The object acts as a portal to another location or position, allowing the observer to see the world differently. The potential of objects to shift our thinking allows them to feed back into this ecosystem of knowledge, demonstrating bodily knowledge as a valuable and legitimate form of knowing, doing so from the perspective of the maker. This might seem quite abstract, but I believe that we have to rebuild the foundations of how we think about and value knowledge. Without educators, institutions, and wider society placing real value on bodily experience, we will continue to lose tacit skills that fall outside of current dominant ideologies. We need to form criteria of worth from within, valuing the knowledge of the sector based on its umwelt or raison d'etre, but also crucially demonstrate how it feeds into and out of other ways of understanding the world, highlighting its role within the ecosystem of knowledge. Thank you for your time. If you are interested in this conversation and you'd like to contact me, my details are on the screen. Thank you very much for listening.